Just to clarify quickly, we do exclusively represent tenant organizations. I've been to a lot of these types of organizations and heard commercial real estate talks, and they have typically focused on the tactical approach, how do you go about finding real estate, how do you go about securing it. So I want to take a bit of a step back and really look at the high level. Just quickly, Cresa, we do three main things. We do strategic planning. So we help you understand how much space you need. How is your organization using the space you have now, and how might you do so in the future? Then we go on to transaction management. So this is the more typical brokerage approach of finding space in the market, getting you the best deal, handling all the documents. But as well, we do the project management piece, so all the way from handling the move, all the construction budgets, furniture procurement. Cresa is the largest tenant-only brokerage company in North America. We have just under 60 offices. We've been open under this brand in Ottawa for 4 years now. I've been a commercial real estate professional for just about 15 years in Ottawa. And what we've really seen when it comes to not-for-profit is your organizations are really changing, not just the economic environment, but the political environment as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we see when we work with you. And there's some friendly faces in the audience as well, so this is some firsthand stuff that we've seen. Funding. Critical for everyone always, but the funding model for many of our clients has really changed or is at least under pressure. Member-based organizations who don't provide a specific license or professional designation are really starting to struggle with justifying their existence to their members. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to know that, given our political and economic climate, that people have a little bit less money in their pocket, whether the federal, provincial, or municipal government or a donor. And a lot of our clients, too, feel that because their funding models might be under some kind of 2-3 year program, depending on how many sources of funding they have, that making long-term commitments with respect to real estate is challenging and maybe even risky. So we're starting to see a lot of people struggle for relevance. And I use this picture because there was a lot of different pictures I could have chosen that were kind of grim and scary. This one is fun. I happen to think guy with a sticky note on his head is one of my favorite pictures. But this is a really great opportunity, and there's a lot of organizations who are really reevaluating what they do, why they do it, and who they reach, and what impact that they can have. And the real estate is a big piece of that. But the way ahead is foggy. In 2008, 2009, when the credit markets were tanking, we did more 1-year and 2-year extensions than I've done in my whole career. I think it's safe to say that people have crawled out from under their desk and are starting to look to the future, but how clear is your crystal ball? Most of our clients can see with some clarity past a couple of years. Some of them can see beyond 3 years, but not many. So it's difficult. And people. We now have these workforces with 4 demographics in them. It is getting harder and harder to find good people and retain them. And the space now is becoming a tool to do that. Attract and retain is probably one of the fundamental concerns that we hear from people when they're talking about their workforce. It takes tens of thousands of dollars to find these people. How do we keep them within our organization? Why do they leave after 2 to 3 years? How on earth do these young people who spend all this time on Facebook fit into our organization when, frankly, not that long ago, a lot of your staff, maybe even yourself, kind of sacrificed on the office space because of the cause or the work that you were doing, and that was kind of part and parcel. We're a not-for-profit organization. We shouldn't be sending a message to the world that our space is a Cadillac. That's not the business we're in. But you know what? People don't want to work in a depressing, claustrophobic, non-collaborative environment. So how do you do that? So this is my new favorite picture, because again, obstacles, I found things like big rocks, people clinging to cliffs, or like barbed wire. But obstacles can be a real opportunity. Let's face it, you guys have to do a lot more reporting, and when I'm speaking to an audience of accountants, than most for-profit organizations, basically everybody. Making clear and defensible decisions is probably when it comes to real estate, is one of the biggest challenges. you have to be able to defend why you got a great deal. You know, everybody's crowing about the federal government picking up the Nortel campus. I can tell you why it was a great deal for taxpayers, why they should have done it. I think they've done a terrible job of explaining that, because a lot of us think that building's probably going to sit vacant till 2020. They're wasting our money. So understanding that messaging, as Karen was mentioning earlier, is really important, because if you can't explain to the audit committee why you made this decision, even if it's a good one, you're going to be in some hot water. Or even if you're just staring yourself in the mirror wondering if, you know, how do I know if I got a good deal? And the board. I put this under challenge because, you know, just depending on your organization, the sophistication of your board members, you may have a lot of volunteers, you may have varying degrees of, you know, professionalism on the board. I thought the founder syndrome was an interesting comment. You know, we see some folks who are really passionate, but maybe are lacking a bit of the business acumen, and prepping the board for, if you don't have capital reserves, or if you are going to have to make a commitment beyond the 2 or 3 year horizon, in advance of spending a whole bunch of time with yourself and folks like me, is really important. Because if you don't do it wrong, we represented a large municipally funded organization in a past company I worked at, who did all the work, spent 2 years working on the big headquarters move, got to the board, and the board said no. You know, and so they actually ended up in a lawsuit with their service provider, because they had done all the work and they expected to be paid, and now there's no money to pay them. So what do you do? It's not an easy question. I'm focusing on some high-level stuff. The important part I want to leave you with, you know, if there's one thing to take away, have a strategy. A lot of people react to their lease expiry date. I use leases as an example because most of us lease space rather than own it. The lease is an arbitrary date that you and the landlord have picked, but it has nothing to do with your business. It has nothing to do with what's going on in your organization, all those things we just mentioned. It is an arbitrary number, and you can get ahead of it and use it as a tool, as opposed to just going, oh, my lease is up in 12 months, I guess I should start thinking about it. Or worse, those options to renew that you have in your leases that give you the chance to renew for an extra 5 years at a rate that you might not like. A lot of tenants react to, and I say this having been a landlord with about 2 million feet under my belt, they think it's the reminder to talk to the landlord about the lease, when it's far from it. Got a couple of quick charts on here. The importance is to make it competitive and get out there and know the market. Blue is the amount of spaces. This is a 10-year horizon for Ottawa, looking backwards. Blue is the number of pockets of space over 50,000 feet, and the yellow line is the availability rate. A lot of my competitors talk about vacancy rate. Availability rate is the amount of space being advertised for lease over the denominator of all the space there is. So you can see that on the yellow line, you know, since the credit markets, we were actually starting to do kind of well, but it's really started to tick up. We haven't seen a lot of big pockets come back, but look what happened to the downtown core. So you've heard about federal government downsizing. So blue, again, pockets of 50,000 feet. There's typically we'd have about, and the right-hand side is the number, pardon me, the left-hand side is the number, the right-hand side is the percentage of the yellow line. I think that's right. Yeah, we have about twice as much space chasing a lot fewer tenants. You're not just the only ones kind of right-siding your space. This is the entire city of Ottawa, and the federal government's leading the charge. So blue is vacant, green is sublet. These are some buildings downtown that are in big trouble. And since they're in big trouble, most of these are not glitzy glass ivory towers. And most of that space has been vacant for well over 2 years, or at least been advertised, and there is nobody coming back. So there's an opportunity for you, if you thought about upgrading your space, to, within your current real estate spend, get a lot of things going. But it takes some planning, and it's not easy, and you probably need some help. The big thing that we're also looking at is, how do you use your space? I think it's safe to say in that 4 people demographic that we use space a lot differently than we used to. This is a good example of what we call a lounge. This is a place where work can happen. You used to call it the kitchen, but you notice there's different ways to have meetings in there. We're bringing wireless access nodes into the space so that you can sit with your laptop on a sunny day like this. Rather than sit at your desk, why wouldn't you sit by the window and work on your laptop? It really depends, and you can plan for it. And the nice thing is it's smaller. The more and more we bring in collaborative spaces like this is an example of what it might look like, or this project teaming office in the middle, semi-formal places in the back. Every time I don't have to put up a wall, it saves you. So what we're really good at lately is taking companies and shaving about 20%, 30% off their total real estate spend. And that's not getting into telework where you've got people working a couple of days a week from home. There's an organization in the room who shares space with another one of our clients who we took out on tour yesterday, and they had thought they needed 2,500 feet. But they pulled, and that was before we set up the tour, they polled their staff, and of the only 7 people there, 5 of them said, yeah, I'd work from home a couple of days a week. Well, that's like 50% of the real estate. So imagine if you could shave 20% off by, we got flat screens, we got a couple of informal meeting spaces, and then what if your staff, and I would venture to say they want to, could find another 20% savings by incorporating some telework, voluntary, things they like to do. You could find 20 to 40% savings on your total real estate spend. What do you think that would do to your budget? So these are just some examples of the kinds of spaces that we're building. We're letting in the light. We're working in ways that we never really did before. This concept of a single kit of parts where, depending on the style of work you're doing, maybe you need a space to sit down for 30% of your day where you're working on a laptop, but then you actually need, there's that personal call or that conference call where it's just you, and rather than having an enclosed office that you're only in 40% of the time because you're in meetings or off-site with clients other times, you can pick up your technology, walk to a closed space, and have a call. But the top line, these are modular wall systems, and the thing to note is that there's some different layouts. So you want to have space that's adaptable to your organization, because no matter what, the day you sign the lease or the day you build that building, 5 years from now, your organization will probably be dramatically different than what it is today. Whatever you do, you're probably going to get it a little bit wrong, and 10 years from now, it'll be really wrong. So you want to make sure, wherever possible, that you're spending money wisely so that you can adapt to those changes. Last I'm going to talk about is flexibility. A lot of people don't realize that, especially in this market where there's more landlords chasing tenants than the other way around, you can build in really, really tactical flexibility into your lease. You mentioned, Karen, about only having one source of funding for that business of yours up in Nunavut. Imagine if you could have a lease termination in the event that that contract doesn't get renewed. Doesn't it sound like you'd probably need it? And opposed to having to bankrupt your organization because of the space, now you have the ability to get lean and mean in the case something changes. And you can do that, and we're pretty good at bringing that in. What's different now is the laws have changed for regulating commercial real estate fairly recently. It's a lot more consumer disclosure that's happening right now. The big change that happened in 2002 was that anybody who manages commercial real estate on behalf of a third party is now a broker. They all have a real estate license. And the reason that was done by the province is that these guys were collecting commissions, then they didn't tell you about it. And they'd say that hiring folks like us costs more money. We're like when you buy a house and the seller pays the commission, but you can have a residential, a buyer agent working for you. That's what we do. There are so many pitfalls, and I say this, I was a landlord for 3 years. There are so many things that go into a commercial lease that frankly don't apply anymore. These 15% supervision fees on any time you change the carpet. Those come from times when the city of Ottawa didn't do a lot of the oversight with respect to building permits. And there's at least 5 or 6 really important things that can handicap your organization, limit your growth, prevent your expansion, or in the event you run into some trouble, limit your ability to sublet or get out of that space without having to rip the whole thing down, write a giant check to the landlord. And oftentimes, tenants who don't take that little bit of extra time to craft an appropriate strategy and a following document find themselves really handicapped by the space. But I challenge you, your space can be an augmenter, an enhancer. It can bring your staff together. It can revitalize your organization, and fortunately in this market with the technology available, it doesn't have to cost you a lot of money.